Ryan, what is this?
It's not what it looks like.
So what does it look like?
Please, let me explain.
Explain what? That you're in my apartment with him?
I'm home, even though she wasn't supposed to be. Then I heard her laugh, soft and breathless, and another voice with it, a voice I knew too well. "Jason, stop," Emily said, still laughing. My chest tightened. I stepped forward. "Emily?" The door to the bedroom was half open. I pushed it. Jason was holding her, her hands on his shoulders. They froze. "Ryan," Emily said. I dropped the flowers. "What is this?" Jason let go slowly. "It's not what it looks like." I laughed, sharp and broken. "So what does it look like?" Emily rushed toward me. "Please let me explain." "Explain what?" I said. "That you're in my apartment with him?" She reached for my arm. I pulled away. "Don't touch me," Jason said. "Bro, calm down." I turned on him. "Don't call me that." Emily's eyes were wet. "You weren't answering your phone. So that makes this okay?" She shook her head. "I was lonely." My laugh came again. "Lonely?" "I worked overtime for this place for our wedding." Jason muttered. "We didn't mean to hurt you." I stepped closer. "You both already did." That's when Olivia walked in from the kitchen. "Ryan, wait." I stared at my sister. "You knew." She looked at the floor. "I didn't want you to get hurt." "So you helped them lie to me?" Emily cried. "Olivia just didn't know how to tell you." I said, "How long?" No one spoke. "How long?" I shouted. Jason said, "A few months." The room spun. "My own sister." Olivia whispered, "You're always busy, Ryan." "So that's your excuse?" Emily grabbed my sleeve. "We still love you." I pulled free. "Love doesn't look like this." Jason said, "Let's talk later." "There is no later." Emily sobbed. "Ryan, please." I opened the door. "Get out." Jason hesitated. "It's your place." I nodded. "Exactly." They left. Olivia stayed. She said, "I didn't want this to happen." I said, "But you let it." She cried. "I'm sorry." I sat on the couch. "Go." She left too. I sat there until my phone rang. It was Emily. "Ryan, pick up." I answered. "What?" She said, "I can't breathe." "Then stop lying." She said, "We can fix this." "There is nothing left to fix." She whispered, "I love you." I hung up. The next morning Olivia came back. "Mom wants to talk." I said, "Tell her I'm busy." Emily texted, "Please meet me." I replied, "No." Jason called. "We need to clear the air." I said, "It's already clear." He said, "You're overreacting." I laughed. Goodbye. I packed Emily's things and put them outside. She came that evening. "Ryan, take your stuff." She cried. "You promised me forever." I said, "You promised me too." She whispered, "I was confused." I said, "So was I until now." Jason stood behind her. "Man, don't do this." I said, "You did this." Olivia watched from the stairs. "Ryan." I said, "Don't." Emily reached out. "I can still choose you." I shook my head. "You already chose." She sobbed. "Please?" I closed the door. I slid down against it, my chest burning. I whispered, "Why?" My phone buzzed again. "Mom." I ignored it. I stared at the ring box. I opened it. The diamond caught the light. I laughed, then cried. I said to the empty room, my life was a lie. I didn't sleep. In the morning I went to work. My boss asked, "You okay?" I said, "No." He nodded. "Take the day." I walked out. I sat in my car. I called Olivia. She answered, "Ryan? Don't." She cried. "I was scared you'd leave." I said, "You pushed me away." Emily sent a message. "Can we talk?" I typed, "There's nothing to say." Jason sent one too. "Bro, we can fix this." I blocked him. I drove to the apartment again. The laughter still echoed in my head. I whispered, "I trusted you." I remembered Emily saying, "Forever." I remembered Olivia saying, "I'll always be your sister." I punched the steering wheel. Liars. That night Emily came again. "Ryan, open the door." I said through it, "Go home." She cried, "This is my home." I said, "Not anymore." Jason's voice joined hers. "Ryan, don't do this." I said, "Leave." Olivia said, "Please?" I said, leave." They left. I locked the door. I leaned against it. I whispered, "It's over." The silence was loud. I looked around the apartment I bought for her. I said, I'll survive. I didn't know how, but I said it anyway. I lay on the floor. I stared at the ceiling. I said, this is the beginning. The betrayal burned, but somewhere under it, something else was forming. I closed my eyes and whispered, I won't break. I didn't know yet, but that night changed everything. My phone buzzed again. It was Olivia. I answered. What do you want? She said, Ryan, please come home. I said, that was never my home. She said, Mom is crying. I said, so am I. She whispered, Jason says he's sorry. I laughed. Tell him I don't care. She said, Emily hasn't eaten. I replied, neither have I. She cried, I was trying to protect you. I said, from what, the truth? Silence. She said, what do you want me to do? I said, leave me alone. She whispered, I miss my brother. I closed my eyes. I miss my life. She said, can we start over? I said, some things don't restart. She said, I love you. I answered, I loved you too. I hung up. I stood and looked out the window. I said, tomorrow I begin again. My phone buzzed once more. Emily. I deleted the message without reading it. I took off the ring and placed it on the table. Goodbye, I said. This was my beginning. I left the apartment and the door closed behind me with a sound that felt final. My phone buzzed immediately. It was Emily. I ignored it. I walked down the stairs and my chest felt hollow. I whispered, you both chose, and the words tasted bitter. Outside the night was cold. I leaned against my car and Olivia ran after me. Ryan, please wait, Olivia said. I said, why did you help them? She said, you were never home. I said, I was working for our future. She said, Emily needed you. I laughed. She had Jason. Olivia said, that's not fair. I said, nothing about this is fair. She cried, I didn't want you to get hurt. I said, then why does it hurt like this? She said, I don't know what to do. I said, go back inside. She whispered, I'm sorry. I opened my car door. I don't forgive you. I drove away while she stood in the street. My phone rang again. Emily. I answered. What? She said, please come back. I said, you didn't deny it. She said, I made a mistake. I said, you made a choice. She cried, I was lonely. I said, you were engaged. She said, you were distant. I said, I was loyal. She whispered, Jason understands me. I said, then stay with him. She said, I want you. I replied, you lost me. She cried, Ryan, I'm scared. I said, so am I. She said, come home. I said, I don't have one. She said, we can rebuild. I said, no. She whispered, please? I hung up. The road blurred. My chest felt like it was tearing. I remembered Emily laughing in my apartment, Jason's hands on her waist, Olivia standing there silent. I slammed my steering wheel and shouted, why? No one answered. I parked by the river. The city lights shook on the water. I sat in the car and shook too. I replayed every moment in my head. Emily saying, forever. Olivia saying, I'll always protect you. Jason saying, trust me. I whispered, did I fail you? The answer was only the sound of traffic. My phone buzzed. Jason. I picked up. Say it. He said, I'm sorry. I said, get away from her. He said, I love her. I said, you love yourself. He said, we didn't plan it. I said, you planned every lie. He said, don't make this ugly. I said, you already did. He said, we can still be brothers. I laughed. Not anymore. He said, you're acting crazy. I said, you're acting guilty. He said, Emily is crying. I said, so am I. He said, let's meet. I said, never. I ended the call. I rested my forehead on the wheel. My breath came in broken pieces. I whispered, I won't beg. I said it again, I won't beg. The words felt small but solid. I drove to Marcus Hill's place. Marcus was my childhood friend, the one person I knew would open the door. He did. Ryan. I said, can I come in? He said, of course. I walked inside and sat on the couch. He handed me water. What happened? I said, Emily cheated with Jason. Olivia helped. He said, no. I nodded. Yes. He said, I'm sorry. I said, they all stood against me. He said, "You don't deserve that." I said, "Tell me what I did wrong." He said, "Nothing." I said, "Then why does it hurt?" He said, "Because you loved them." I said, "I still do." He said, "That's the worst part." I laughed without humor. They told me I was too busy. He said, "You were building a life." I said, "They destroyed it." He said, "You're not alone." I said, "I am tonight." He said, "You can stay." I said, "Thank you." He said, "Eat something." I shook my head. "Not now." He said, "Sleep." I said, "I can't." He said, "Talk." I said, "They chose each other." He said, "Then you choose yourself." I looked at him. "How?" He said, "By walking away." I whispered, "I already did." He said, "Good." My phone buzzed again. "Emily." I turned it off. I stayed at Marcus's place. The ceiling was unfamiliar. I stared at it and thought about the ring I planned to give Emily. I thought about Olivia's smile when we were kids. I thought about Jason promising to have my back. I whispered, 3 people, 1 knife. Morning came. Marcus made coffee. He said, "What now?" I said, "I don't know." He said, "You will." I said, "I won't beg." He nodded. "That's a start." I walked outside. The day felt empty but possible. I put my phone in my pocket and said, "I'm done chasing." I took a breath. I will survive this. I called my mother. She answered. "Ryan, where are you?" I said, "I need time." She said, "Your sister is crying." I said, "So am I." She said, "Come home." I said, "Not today." She said, "We are family." I said, "Family does not stab each other." She went silent. I said, "I love you but I need space." She whispered, "Be careful." I replied, "I will." I hung up and texted my boss. "Personal emergency." He wrote, "Take the day." I said, "Thank you." I looked at the sky and whispered, "I will never beg again." I walked to the corner store, bought a sandwich and forced myself to eat. The clerk asked, "You okay?" I said, "Not really." He said, "Tomorrow is better." I nodded and said, "It has to be." Then I turned toward the street and kept walking. I promised myself I would endure. I stayed at Marcus's place for a week. 7 days of silence, walls, and the sound of my own breathing. On the first morning Marcus said, "You need to eat." I said, "Later?" He said, "You said that yesterday." I said, "I'm not hungry." He put a sandwich on the table. "Just try." I didn't touch it. By the 3rd day he said, "Ryan, you're disappearing." I said, "Good." He stared at me. "That's not funny." I shrugged. "Nothing is." My phone kept lighting up. Emily's name. Olivia's name. My mother's name. On the 4th day I finally answered my mom. She said, "Ryan, you're hurting your sister." I said, "She hurt me first." She said, "She's young. She made a mistake." I said, "So did Emily." She said, "Let it go." I laughed. "That's your advice?" She said, "Family comes first." I said, "I thought so too." She sighed. "Come home." I said, "No." She said, "Your father agrees with me." I said, "Then both of you can agree without me." She went quiet. "You're being selfish." I said, "I'm surviving." I hung up. Marcus asked, "Parents?" I nodded. "They're on her side." He said, "That's messed up." I said, "Everything is." On the 5th day Emily posted pictures. Her and Jason on the couch. Her and Jason at dinner. Her and Jason smiling. Marcus saw me staring at my phone. He said, "Don't do that to yourself." I said, "I need to see it." He said, "Why?" I said, "So I know it's real." He said, "It's real enough." I locked my phone. On the 6th day Marcus said, "Let's go outside." I said, "Why?" He said, "Sunlight still exists." I didn't answer. On the 7th day I finally spoke more than 3 words. Marcus asked, "What scares you the most right now?" I said, "That this is who I am now." He said, "And who is that?" I said, "The guy nobody chose." He shook his head. "That's not true." I said, "My fiancé chose my stepbrother. My sister chose them. My parents chose her." He said, "I choose you." I swallowed. That night I left the apartment without telling him. I drove to the bridge. The city lights blurred. The wind was cold. Cars rushed past. I stood there staring down at the water. I whispered, "Would this stop the pain?" I thought about Emily's laugh. Jason's hands on her. Olivia's silence. My mother saying let it go. I stepped closer. A voice behind me said, "You don't look like someone who should give up." I turned. A girl stood there holding a coffee cup with both hands. She said, "Sorry? I didn't mean to scare you." I said, "You didn't." She looked at me. "You okay?" I said, "No." She nodded. "That's honest." I said, "You should go." She said, "Not yet." I stared at her. "Why?" She shrugged. "Because you look like someone who needs company." I laughed. "That obvious?" She smiled a little. "Very." I said, "I'm not good company." She said, "I'm not picky." I sighed and leaned on the rail again. She stood beside me. She said, "What happened?" I said, "Everything." She said, "Start anywhere." I said, "My fiancé cheated with my stepbrother. My sister helped them. My parents told me to move on." She blinked. "That's a lot." I said, "I thought so too." She said, "I'm Lily." I said, "Ryan?" She said, "Nice to meet you, Ryan, even though this is the worst timing ever." I laughed once. She said, "What are you thinking about right now?" I said, "Whether disappearing would make the pain stop." She shook her head. "It wouldn't." I said, "How do you know?" She said, "Because pain doesn't die. It changes shape." I looked at her. "Who are you?" She smiled. "Your junior from college." I frowned. "Lily Bennett?" She nodded. "You remembered." I said, "You helped me with statistics." She said, "And you helped me survive calculus." I breathed out. "Small world." She said, "Why didn't you call someone?" I said, "Everyone I trusted is gone." She said, "Not everyone." I said, "You barely know me." She said, "Sometimes that's safer." I stared at the water again. She said, "What do you want right now?" I said, "The noise in my head to stop." She said, "Then talk to me." I said, "I don't know how to be this broken." She said, "You're doing it perfectly." I said, "I'm scared." She said, "That means you still care about living." I swallowed. "I feel invisible." She said, "I see you." My throat tightened. She said, "Come get coffee with me." I hesitated. She said, "Just coffee." I nodded. We walked to the cafe nearby. She said, "You didn't jump." I said, "Because you showed up." She smiled. "Then I'm glad I went for a walk tonight." I looked at her. "So am I." We sat. The warmth felt strange. She said, "Promise me something." I said, "What?" She said, "When tonight ends you keep going." I said, "I don't know how." She said, "You learn." I nodded slowly. She said, "You're not alone anymore." For the first time since the betrayal, I believed that. Lily started texting me the next morning. "Did you eat?" I replied, "No." 5 minutes later she said, "Open your door." I opened it and she stood there holding 2 coffee cups and a paper bag. She said, "Now you will." I smiled a little. "You're bossy." She said, "You need it." We sat at the small table in Marcus's kitchen. She said, "What's in your head today?" I said, "Noise." She nodded. "Same." She kept showing up every day. Sometimes she said, "How was work?" Sometimes she said, "Tell me one good thing." Sometimes she said, "Come walk with me." She never pushed. She never asked me to explain everything again. One afternoon I said, "Why are you doing this?" She shrugged. "Because someone should." I laughed. "You don't even know me anymore." She said, "I know enough." After a week Marcus said, "That girl saved your life." I said, "She's saving it slowly." I went back to work. My boss, Daniel Wright, called me into his office. He said, "You look better." I said, "I'm trying." He said, "I heard about the situation." I blinked. "How?" He said, "Small company." I said, "I'm sorry if my performance dropped." He leaned back. "Your performance is why you're here." I looked up. "What?" He said, "I'm giving you the new project." I said, "Seriously?" He nodded. "You've earned it." I walked out of his office and texted Lily. "I got promoted." She replied, "Proud of you." I felt something warm for the first time in weeks. That night Lily brought noodles and sat on the floor with me. She said, "Tell me about your job." I talked for 15 minutes without stopping. She smiled. "There he is." I said, "Who?" She said, "The man who cares again." A few days later my phone buzzed. "Emily, I miss our old life. I stared at the message. Lily noticed. Her? I nodded. She said, what are you going to do? I typed nothing. I locked the screen. I said, ignore it. She smiled. Good. The next morning another message. Emily, we were happy once. I showed Lily. She said, were you? I thought about it. I was trying to be. She nodded. That's not the same. Another message. Emily, Jason isn't the man I thought. I didn't answer. Later Marcus called. He said, you hear about Jason? I said, no. He said, he got fired. I paused. Why? He said, fight with a coworker. I closed my eyes. I'm not surprised. He said, Emily's been asking about you. I said, she knows my number. He said, she's regretting things. I said, that's not my problem. Marcus said, damn right. That evening Lily and I walked through the park. She said, do you feel different? I said, yes. She said, how? I said, lighter. She smiled. That's healing. I started training again. One morning Lily said, what are you doing up so early? I said, running. She said, since when? I said, since I got tired of hating myself. She joined me sometimes, slow but smiling. After a month Daniel called me again. He said, you're doing well. I said, thank you. He said, I'm recommending you for the senior position. I froze. Already? He nodded. You deserve it. I walked out shaking and called Lily. I got another promotion. She laughed. Of course you did. I said, I don't feel broken anymore. She said, that's because you aren't. One night Lily introduced me to Sophie Lane. Sophie said, so this is the famous Ryan. I said, famous for what? She said, surviving heartbreak. Lily rolled her eyes. Don't scare him. Sophie smiled. I like him. I said, that makes one of us. Sophie said, oh, you'll like yourself soon. Lily squeezed my hand. Later Sophie whispered to Lily but I heard it. She said, he's different now. Lily whispered back, he's becoming himself. Another week passed. Emily messaged again. I'm sorry. I didn't reply. Then, please talk to me. I put the phone face down. Lily said, still nothing? I nodded. She said, that's strength. I said, it's peace. Jason sent a message too. We need to talk. I blocked him. One evening my mother called. She said, Ryan, your sister is struggling. I said, so am I. She said, Emily is alone. I said, so was I. She went quiet. I said, I'm not angry anymore. She whispered, that scares me. I said, it shouldn't. Work kept improving. My body felt stronger. My mind felt steadier. One afternoon Lily said, you laugh more. I said, you're the reason. She said, no, you are. We sat on the steps outside Marcus's place. She said, do you still think about the bridge? I said, sometimes. She said, and? I said, I'm glad I didn't jump. She smiled. Me too. She rested her head on my shoulder. I said, you never asked me for anything. She said, I didn't need to. I said, why not? She said, because I just wanted you to live. I closed my eyes. Emily sent one last message. I wish I could go back. I deleted it. I looked at Lily and said, I'm moving forward. She said, I know. I stood and held out my hand. She took it. The darkness inside me finally loosened its grip. I said, thank you. She smiled. Anytime. I hadn't noticed it at first. One evening Lily Bennett laughed at something small I said. The sound filled the apartment, warm and bright. I realized my chest tightened. I realized my heart raced. I said, Lily, can I say something? She looked up from her cup of tea. Sure. What is it? I swallowed. I think I love you. She froze. Her smile didn't falter. She just tilted her head. You think? I said, no. I know. I'm not pretending. She put down her cup. Ryan. I held her gaze. I don't expect you to feel the same. I just had to tell you. She smiled softly. I've been waiting for you to say that. I blinked. What? She said, I knew you were hurting. I knew you needed time. I wanted to hear it from you, not force it. I laughed nervously. So you were waiting for me? She nodded. Yes. I felt a weight lift. Then, will you? She reached out. Yes. The first time we held hands felt like sunlight through rain. We started dating that week. Simple dinners, quiet walks, and the kind of conversations that made me feel safe. I realized for the first time in months that life could be steady, predictable in the best way. One afternoon, while Lily was fixing tea, my phone buzzed. Emily. I ignored it. She sent another. We need to talk. I blocked her. Another message. Jason is no good for me. I didn't reply. Lily watched me. Still thinking about the bridge? I shook my head. No. It's gone. She smiled. Good. Then focus on what's in front of you. I nodded. Meanwhile, chaos was brewing elsewhere. I heard from Marcus that Emily and Jason were fighting constantly. My sister Olivia was caught in the middle. I said, I don't care what they do. Marcus said, you used to care. I said, not anymore. They chose each other over me. He said, and your parents? I said, Mom and Dad are frustrated. Even they can't protect them now. Things shifted fast. My parents grew distant from Olivia and Jason. Their relationship with Emily strained, and I realized I had quietly regained a kind of balance in my life. I said to Lily one night, it feels different. She looked up from the book she was reading. Different how? I said, I feel in control again. Not just surviving but living. She said, that's how it should be. I nodded. I even think I can forgive them. Not for them but for me. She reached for my hand. I'm glad. One weekend, Lily invited me to meet her father, Mr. Bennett. I was nervous. Do you think he'll approve? She laughed. He will. Just don't overthink it. We arrived at the Bennett house. Mr. Bennett opened the door. He was tall, serious, but his eyes softened when he saw me. Ryan Carter, he said, extending a hand. Lily tells me a lot about you. I shook it. All good things, I hope. He chuckled. Mostly. I'm glad she has someone steady now. I said, I'll do my best. He nodded. That's all I ask. Afterward, Lily and I walked in the garden. See, she said. Not so scary. I said, you were right. I was overthinking. She laughed. Of course you were. Our relationship grew slowly but surely. Every day I found myself smiling without thinking. I laughed at work again. I trained again. I started cooking. Lily stayed beside me, never demanding, just present. One evening Marcus called. He said, Emily's latest stunt? I said, what now? He laughed. She tried to show up at Jason's work, claiming she was going to save him. I said, and? He said, security escorted her out. Jason's reputation is tanking. I leaned back in my chair. Good. Marcus said, your sister? I said, she's realizing that my parents aren't on her side anymore. He said, power shift is happening. I smiled faintly. It feels satisfying in a quiet way. Lily peeked in from the kitchen. Satisfying? I said, quietly satisfying. She laughed. You sound like a hero in your own story. I said, maybe I finally am. She walked over and rested her head on my shoulder. You've earned it. I said, thanks for being here. She said, always. Another night we sat on the balcony. City lights flickered below us. I said, you know, I never thought I'd feel this safe. She said, safe doesn't mean weak. I said, I feel strong. She said, good. Keep it that way. I told her about the promotions at work, about my new responsibilities, about how I was rebuilding my life. She said, and I get to watch? I nodded. And help. She squeezed my hand. That's love. I laughed softly. I didn't expect love to arrive quietly like this. She smiled. That's because it didn't announce itself. It just stayed. I said, I'm glad it stayed with you. She kissed my cheek. I'm glad you stayed too. For the first time in months I felt whole. Not because revenge worked. Not because betrayal hurt less. But because someone chose to stand beside me, unconditionally. I whispered, I love you, Lily. She smiled. I know. And I love you too. The balance of power in my life had shifted. My past hurt was fading. Emily and Jason's chaos didn't touch me anymore. Olivia's lies, my parents' frustrations, all of it felt distant. All that mattered was here now. And Lily. The knock on the door came early. I wasn't ready for it. I opened the door. Jason Miller stood there, sweat on his brow, eyes desperate. Ryan, please, he said. I raised an eyebrow. Please what? He said, I messed up, debts, bills. I need help. I laughed sharply. You think I'll fix this for you? He swallowed. I know I messed up, but I'm asking. Just once. Please. I crossed my arms. Once. You ruined my life once. Why should this be different? He said, I didn't know it would get this bad. I need you. I stepped back. No. You chose your path. You live with it. His shoulders slumped. You're serious? I said, I've never been more serious in my life. He took a step forward. Please, Ryan. I'll pay you back. I shook my head. I don't want your money. I want my peace. He looked down, defeated. Ryan, please. I said, goodbye, Jason. He turned, walking away slowly. I closed the door. I leaned against it. My chest still burned. You're gone from my life, I whispered. Then my phone buzzed. Olivia Carter. I opened it. Ryan, I'm sorry. I can't believe what I did. I hurt you. I'm sorry. I stared at the screen. My fingers trembled. I called her. She answered, voice shaking. Ryan. I said, do you know how much you hurt me? She cried. I know, Ryan. I should have told you. I should have stopped them. I should have, everything. I'm sorry. I sat down. You were supposed to protect me. You were my sister. How did it come to this? She sobbed. I was scared. I didn't know how. I was wrong. I breathed out. I understand you're sorry. But that doesn't change the past. She said, I know. I had to tell you. I nodded. It's heard. She whispered, can we ever? I shook my head. No. I'm choosing my own path now. She went quiet. I understand. I love you, Ryan. I said, I love you too, as my sister. But I can't let this ruin me anymore. We hung up. I felt a strange weight lift. That night I called Lily Bennett. She answered immediately. Ryan, are you okay? I said, better now. I need to ask you something. She said, anything. I took a deep breath. Lily, will you marry me? There was silence for a moment. Then she laughed softly. Are you serious? I said, as serious as I've ever been. She said, yes. Of course, yes. I felt my chest open, warmth flooding through me. You mean it? She said, every word. I whispered, I can't believe this. It feels like sunrise after a long night. She said, it's real, Ryan. You don't have to be afraid anymore. I held the phone close. Thank you for staying with me through all of it. She said, I wouldn't be anywhere else. The next morning we went out to look at rings. She laughed at everything. I laughed too. That evening I came home to find my door rattling. Emily Turner. She was clearly drunk. Hair messy, eyes red. She shouted my name. Ryan. Ryan. I made a mistake. I opened the door just enough to see her face. She said, I want you back. I was wrong. I don't care about Jason. I felt anger rise but also calm. I said, Emily, no. I don't care what you want. You made your choice. She cried, Ryan, please? I stepped forward and closed the door firmly. No. She banged on the door. Ryan. Ryan. I said, it's over. Go home. Her yelling faded. I leaned against the door, heart still racing. I whispered, no turning back. Later Lily arrived. She smiled, seeing the door closed. Everything okay? I said, perfect. I finally chose my future. She took my hand. Then we started together. I said, yes. We sat on the couch. She rested her head on my shoulder. I said, for the first time in months I feel complete. She smiled. That's because you are. Days passed. Jason's debts piled higher. Emily's messages stopped eventually, then dwindled into silence. Olivia tried to make peace, but I maintained distance. My parents began to see Jason and Emily's instability for themselves. Slowly the balance shifted. I told Lily one night, I can finally breathe without fear of betrayal. She kissed my forehead. You deserve it. I laughed softly. I never thought I'd feel this safe again. She said, you've earned it. You worked for it. I said, not just me. You helped me too. She squeezed my hand. Always. I stared out the window at the city lights. No more looking back. Only forward. She rested against me. And forward is bright. I whispered, yes. Forward is everything we want it to be. I realized then that the past, the betrayals, the heartbreak, they had shaped me but they no longer controlled me. I said, Lily, thank you for showing me what love really is. She smiled softly. I'll show you every day. I held her close, breathing in the calm, the warmth, the steady beat of her heart. The sun would rise again tomorrow, and I would face it with someone who truly loved me. Emily, Jason, Olivia, they had lost what they wanted to take from me. I had chosen my future instead. And that future had a name. Lily Bennett, I whispered. Forever with you. She smiled against my chest. Forever. For the first time I felt unstoppable. I hadn't heard from Jason Miller in weeks. Then Marcus called. Ryan, he said, voice sharp. You need to hear this. I sat up. What now? Marcus said, Jason got fired. Big fight with a coworker. Company had no choice. I exhaled slowly. Finally. Marcus said, it gets better. Emily Turner, she's in trouble too. I raised an eyebrow. How? Marcus laughed softly. Scandal at work. Everyone's talking. She won't last long. I said nothing. I let it sink in. It wasn't me. Not a word I said, not an action I took. Karma had its quiet way. I called Lily Bennett immediately. Lily, it's happening, I said. She smiled over the video call. What happened? I said, Jason got fired. Emily's job is collapsing. She laughed softly. Quiet justice, huh? I nodded. Exactly. We sat together that night planning the wedding. The invitations, the small ceremony, everything. It felt real, tangible. I finally felt I was building something instead of reacting. Marcus called again. Oh, and your sister? I frowned. Olivia? He said, she moved out. Can't live with your parents anymore. They're done taking her side. I said, good. Let her deal with it. Marcus laughed. You've got no sympathy? I said, I gave all the sympathy I had. It's gone. She made her choices. The next day Lily and I went to the florist. She said, you're calm about all this. I said, because it's not my fight anymore. She looked at me. You're stronger than you realize. I shrugged. Maybe I'm just finally free. Later Marcus texted. Jason's house in foreclosure. Emily's apartment is up for auction. They're crumbling. I smiled faintly. It's satisfying to watch even from afar. Lily called. Are you smiling again? I said, yes. I can finally smile without guilt. She said, good. Because we're about to start our life. I took a deep breath. Yes. Together. One afternoon I bumped into my parents. They said, Ryan, everything's changing. Your sister, she's moving on her own. Emily, she's not coming around. I said, I know. My mother frowned. Do you feel any responsibility? I said, none. They chose their paths. I didn't push them there. My father looked down. It's strange to see them fall without your intervention. I said, maybe that's the point. Some things are beyond us. I walked away. For the first time I felt detached from the chaos I'd left behind. At work, Daniel Wright said, Ryan, your project is thriving. You've handled everything perfectly. I said, thanks. It feels good to focus on something positive. He nodded. You deserve stability. I smiled faintly. I've earned it. That evening Lily and I sat on the balcony. The city lights sparkled below. She said, you're finally calm. I said, it's a strange feeling. Quiet, clean. She rested her head on my shoulder. You've built something real. I said, and I'm keeping it. Nothing will touch it. She laughed softly. Except me, of course. I smiled. Except you. We spoke about the wedding. She said, I can't wait to call you my husband. I said, and I can't wait to call you my wife. We laughed together, planning the menu, the decorations, everything simple and meaningful. I realized then that the world could crumble around some people, but it wouldn't reach me anymore. Emily's messages stopped eventually. Jason's calls ceased. Olivia tried reaching out, but I kept boundaries. My parents learned quickly that their choices had consequences too. Marcus called one night. Quiet karma, huh? I laughed softly. Exactly. They created their own downfall. I didn't have to do a thing. He said, feels satisfying? I said, it's justice without revenge. Peace without effort. Lily kissed my cheek. You're glowing. I said, I'm alive. That's enough. The wedding day approached. Invitations were sent. Flowers were chosen. My suit was fitted perfectly. Lily looked radiant in her dress, laughing and holding my hand. She whispered, we're finally here. I said, yes, we are. I thought of the past, Emily and Jason, Olivia's betrayal, my parents' doubts. All gone, all irrelevant. All consequences had caught up with them without me lifting a finger. I held Lily's hand tightly. This feels like sunrise after a long night. She smiled softly. It's more than that. It's a new beginning. I said, exactly. A life we choose ourselves. The day arrived. Marcus stood nearby, smiling. Daniel Wright congratulated me on the success of my career and my life. Lily's father, Mr. Bennett, gave me a firm nod. Everything aligned. Quiet justice, karma completed its course. Emily's scandal, Jason's firing, Olivia's departure. It all played out while I focused on love, life, and happiness. I whispered to Lily before the ceremony, we did this. We chose our future. She rested her head on my shoulder. And nothing can touch it. I looked around at the small gathering, the flowers, the smiles. Strength. I said, thank you for standing by me. She smiled. Always. The sun shone softly through the windows, warming the room. I realized I had survived not just the betrayals but the chaos, the heartbreak. I had chosen the life I wanted. And no one, no past mistake, no betrayal, no sister, no ex-fiancé, no stepbrother could take it from me. I held Lily Bennett's hand and for the first time in years, I felt truly free. The day was brighter than I imagined. I stood in the back of the small chapel, adjusting my tie. Lily Bennett smiled at me. You look nervous. I laughed softly. A little. She took my hand. You'll be amazing. I nodded. Thank you for being here. Marcus leaned in. You've got this, Ryan? I smiled faintly. I hope so. We walked to the altar together. Every step felt heavy with memory, light with hope. The doors opened and they walked in. Emily Turner. My former fiancée, tears streaked down her cheeks. Olivia Carter. My sister, avoiding my gaze completely. Jason Miller. My stepbrother, head lowered, shuffling. I felt a strange calm. The past surrounded me but I didn't flinch. I whispered to Lily, they came. She nodded, squeezing my hand. We face it together. The officiant started. We are gathered here. I glanced at Emily Turner. She sniffled, trying to compose herself. I could see the regret in her eyes. I thought you chose your path. This is mine. Olivia Carter sat rigidly, hands folded, avoiding me entirely. I wondered what she thought. Did she realize what she lost? Jason Miller kept his eyes down. I didn't feel anger. I felt power. Quiet strength. The man who once wanted to disappear was here, steady, unbroken. The officiant said, Do you, Ryan Carter? I looked at Lily Bennett. Her eyes were soft, full of warmth. I took a deep breath. I do, I said, voice steady. She smiled, tears in her eyes. I do. The officiant said, You may now kiss the bride. I leaned in and kissed Lily Bennett. The world blurred. The past, the betrayals, the pain, they all melted away in that moment. We pulled back. I whispered, We did it. She laughed softly. We did. The guests clapped. Emily Turner dabbed at her eyes, staring at us. I felt a pang, but it wasn't sadness. It was closure. Olivia Carter shifted uncomfortably, glancing at me briefly, then looking away. I wondered if she even recognized the man standing before her. The man who had rebuilt himself from heartbreak. Jason Miller avoided my eyes entirely. I could feel his shame without needing words. Marcus leaned over. You've come a long way. I nodded. Further than I ever thought possible. After the ceremony we stepped outside. The sun hit my face. Warm. Bright. Free. Emily Turner approached. Ryan. I said nothing. I simply smiled politely. She said, I'm sorry for everything. I raised a hand. No more words. The past is behind us. She nodded, tears glistening. You look happy. I said, I am. She turned and left. Olivia Carter lingered a moment. I said, Olivia? She shook her head. I can't. Not today. I nodded. I understand. She walked away slowly. Jason Miller stood at the edge, unsure. I said, Goodbye, Jason. He nodded slightly. Goodbye, Ryan. I felt nothing but calm. Lily Bennett looped her arm through mine. Ready? I nodded. More than ever. We walked through the garden. Guests smiled, flowers swayed, sunlight warmed everything. I whispered, It's surreal. All the pain, it led here. She said, And it brought you to me. I held her hand tightly. Yes, you saved me. She laughed softly. We saved each other. We reached the reception. Marcus nudged me. You're glowing. I smiled. I feel it. Every moment of it. Dinner began. Everyone mingled. I noticed that Emily Turner tried to make conversation, but no one engaged with her like before. The scandal and the betrayals followed her quietly. Olivia Carter stayed at the side. I watched her from across the room. She looked smaller somehow. I wondered if she'd ever realize how close she came to losing family entirely. Jason Miller slouched in a chair. His head hung low. I didn't feel satisfaction in cruelty but in justice. He was facing consequences not because of me but because of choices he made. Lily Bennett leaned over. You're too focused on them. I laughed softly. It's hard not to notice. She kissed my cheek. Then focus on me. I did. Every word. Every laugh. Every soft touch reminded me why I survived everything. Later Marcus came to me. They can see it now, huh? I nodded. Yes. I'm standing tall. Stronger than ever. And happy. He said, I knew you would be. I glanced at Lily Bennett. I couldn't have done it without her. She squeezed my hand. We faced everything together. The night wore on. The sun dipped behind the horizon. Lanterns lit the garden. Music played softly. Guests laughed. I whispered, this is perfect. She smiled. It's just the beginning. I said, and I'm ready for every second. Emily Turner passed by, shoulders slumped, eyes avoiding mine. I realized I felt nothing but a quiet peace. She had her regrets. Jason had his consequences. Olivia had her distance. None of it touched me anymore. I leaned closer to Lily Bennett. We survived. We thrived. She whispered, yes. And we'll continue to thrive. I laughed softly. It's strange. I once wanted to disappear. Now I'm standing at the altar, alive, strong, loved. She smiled warmly. And never alone. I nodded. Never alone. Later, as the night deepened, fireworks lit the sky. I held Lily Bennett tightly. We watched the colors burst above. I said softly, this is what life feels like when you choose it. She rested her head on my shoulder. And we chose it together. I whispered, exactly. Together. I glanced back once at the small group who had come to witness this day. Emily Turner's tears, Olivia Carter's avoidance, Jason Miller's shame, it all felt distant now. Karma had done its work quietly. And I had chosen my own happiness. I leaned in and kissed Lily Bennett. To us. She smiled. To us. The man who once wanted to disappear had not only survived, he had risen. Stronger, wiser, unshakable. I held her hand as we walked forward into our new life. And nothing from the past could touch us anymore. Months had passed since the wedding. Life with Lily Bennett was steady, calm, and brighter than I could have imagined. One evening, I stepped out of my apartment to grab coffee. And there they were. Emily Turner, hair messy, eyes hollow. Olivia Carter, tense and withdrawn. Jason Miller, slouched and ashamed. I felt nothing at first. No anger, no bitterness, no temptation to yell. Just peace. Emily's gaze met mine briefly. Her eyes flickered with recognition. I said softly, hello, Emily. She swallowed. Right. I held up a hand. No words. It's okay. Olivia Carter's eyes dropped. I said, Olivia. She hesitated. Ryan. I nodded once. It's okay. Jason Miller avoided my gaze completely. I said, Jason. He muttered, Ryan? I smiled faintly. That's all. They stood there for a moment, unsure, caught between regret and shame. I thought back to the nights I spent in my car, the bridge, the despair, the betrayal. And I realized something. Those moments didn't destroy me. They forged me. I said, take care of yourselves. They didn't respond. I didn't need them to. I walked away, each step light. The streets of the city were warm with sunset. I whispered to myself, I'm free. Truly free. Later that night, Lily Bennett was in the kitchen, humming as she prepared tea. I stepped inside. Hey. She looked up. Hey. How was your walk? I smiled, handing her a coffee cup. Peaceful. She raised an eyebrow. Peaceful? I nodded. I ran into Emily, Olivia, and Jason. She set down the tea. Oh, and? I said, nothing. They're shadows of their past. I felt, nothing. She laughed softly. Not even a flicker of anger? I shook my head. Not anymore. Anger is wasted energy. I feel calm. Strong. She walked over, placing her hands on my shoulders. You've changed. I smiled. I had to. I almost let them break me. She whispered, and now? I said, now. I'm the man I was meant to be. We sat on the couch together. I sipped coffee, listening to the soft hum of our apartment. She said, "Do you ever think about the past?" I nodded slightly. Sometimes. But it's like watching a movie I've already finished. I know the ending and it doesn't scare me. She smiled. Good. Because we have our own story now. I took her hand. Exactly. Our life, our choices, our happiness. She laughed softly. And it's a good one. Weeks went by. At work, I focused entirely on my projects. Daniel Wright praised my dedication. "Ryan, you've grown so much." I said, "Thank you. I've learned a lot." He nodded. "It shows in your work." I smiled faintly. "It shows in everything." One afternoon Marcus called. He said, "So, you ran into them?" I laughed softly. "Yes. But nothing matters anymore." He said, "Good for you." "Really?" I said, "It's strange. I used to crave revenge. I wanted them to suffer. But, peace feels better." Marcus chuckled. "You've become someone new." I said, "Someone who survived." Lily Bennett texted me later that evening. "Dinner's ready?" I walked to the kitchen. She greeted me with a smile, holding a plate of food. I said, "You're amazing." She laughed. "I know. Now eat." I sat beside her. "I have a thought." She raised an eyebrow. "What?" I said, "All the betrayal, the heartbreak, it didn't destroy me. It rebuilt me. I'm stronger, calmer, and happier than ever." She placed her hand on mine. "That's what love does too, Ryan." I nodded. "Exactly. The fire that almost burned me became the fire that shaped me." She kissed my cheek. "And I got to stand beside you through it all." I smiled softly. "You did. And I couldn't imagine it any other way." That night we sat on the balcony, city lights twinkling below. I said, "The world keeps moving, Lily. And I used to be afraid it would crush me. But now." She whispered, "But now?" I said, "Now I can stand tall even when shadows of the past appear. I don't need to fight them. I only need to live my life." She rested her head on my shoulder. "And we'll face everything together." I nodded. "Yes, together." The months passed. Emily Turner's life spiraled quietly. Olivia Carter moved far away. Jason Miller struggled on his own. I heard of their hardships only through the city whispers, and I felt nothing but calm. I had no desire to intervene. I had no bitterness. I had only clarity. One morning Marcus asked, "Ryan, do you miss the old days?" I laughed softly. "No. I don't miss pain, betrayal, or regret. They served their purpose." Marcus said, "Purpose?" I said, "They forged me. Without them, I wouldn't appreciate this life with Lily." He paused. "She's lucky to have you." I said, "And I'm lucky to have her." Evenings were quiet. Lily and I shared dinners, stories, and soft laughter. I whispered to her one night, "I never thought life could feel this steady." She smiled. "It's steady because we built it." I said, "Yes. Because we survived and we chose each other." She rested her head on my chest. "And that's all that matters." I held her close. "Exactly. Nothing from the past can touch us." The man who once wanted to disappear, who almost let betrayal destroy him, was gone. In his place stood a man calm, strong, and full of love. I said softly, "I am the man I became." She kissed my cheek. "And I love him." I laughed softly. "Then I love her." The world outside moved on. But in our apartment, with Lily Bennett by my side, life felt complete. No anger. No regrets. Only peace. Only love. Only a future we built together. And for the first time in years I felt whole.